Hey friends, this is the last Story Hacker podcast, and I'm kind of not mad about it. Yo. Welcome to the Story Better podcast. My name is Nick. I'm your host. I've been holding it down podcasting since 2016, 2014. Don't remember. Honestly, doesn't matter. But hey, welcome. Happy New Year to you. Hopefully you are having a good New Year. And what I'd like to say to you and to yours is, hope you make 2025 one of the best that it could possibly be. Here at the Story Better podcast, we believe that better stories lead to brighter futures. And the way that we take a look at internal narrative is through script writing, it's through marketing, and it's through the stories that we tell. That is essentially like our zeitgeist. It is what influences us most. And as a consumeristic society, when we really look at the way that we believe and the way that we consume and the way that we're marketed to, there is this big idea that you are not enough. And what I mean by that is every single marketing ploy that is going to really try to get your attention and grab your dollars is aimed at this idea that you're not enough. But if you do get this brand new car or this new shirt or this new phone, that you're going to magically be better. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk about 7 philosophies that can help us from getting to that place of being sucked into consumerism. These are 7 philosophies that I believe will help our internal narrative. They're things that I am bringing to my 2025. And so I just want to share these with you. I don't think these are necessarily like the best of the best. They are just 7 things I learned in 2024 that I'm bringing into 2025, and then I want to bring you along for the ride. So first off, storybetter.co is where you can go. There is a 90-day, what I would consider story mode, and essentially it's the next 90 days. You choose a diet. Go ahead and choose. I have a book list for you as well. There's some books that you could check out. And not only book lists and some diets, but there are some trackers for your workout and for the way that you keep this brain-body integrated and feeling good in 2025. So storybetter.co, go check it out. Let's hop into these 7 philosophies. I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's just dive right in. First thing is everything has a dark side. And what I think here is most important is to understand the balance of good and bad outcomes and the importance of acknowledging unintended consequences. And what I mean by that is if you were to grab a small pebble and drop it into a pond, it would make a small ripple effect. If there was any like little toy boats on there, they might feel the waves. But if you were to take this huge, gigantic rock and throw it into this pond, what's going to happen is those waves are going to be higher and higher. And it's going to disrupt whatever is in the water, whether those are like little baby ducks or toy boats. And I got the opportunity to see this firsthand. I was out on the Guadalupe River with my family for some Christmas time, some holiday time. And the people who were doing their water skiing, depending on how fast and how hard they were moving through the water, it would send ripple effects, and it would affect the kids who are fishing, and it would affect water just splashing up on the dock. And especially if you weren't in those swim trunks or those clothes, that water's going to come up and wash upon you. And so philosophically, why this makes a lot of importance in our life is this big reason, is that everything has a dark side and a consequence. And so the ripple effects of what you do, you might not see. So your diet, you might not see for years and years and years down the road. Your health and wellness, you might not see for years and years down the road. Or if you choose to hold on to some philosophical ideas or a story that you tell yourself about yourself, and it's 40 years later, you're going to start to see that, wow, this narrative has not helped me. And so even if it's the best narrative that you could possibly muster, there is always a dark side. And I think of, the Asian symbol, the yin and the yang, that even in the light side, there is a piece of dark, and same thing within the dark side, there is something that is pretty, light. And these all boil down to this big idea that there is something good in darkness and something dark in goodness. And I know that seems really complicated. That seems like, why are we discussing this about a philosophy? And I think it's because a lot of times we ignore our own dark side. What I mean by that, there's a shadow side. There is a side that we have deemed negative because of the emotions that it carries. There is a side that we've deemed negative because maybe it brings shame. And so my questions to you to help you refine this idea of exploring your dark side is that how do we recognize and confront that? How do you take the time in this space to recognize that? I love some religions because some religions ask you to really dive deep into what are those dark sides. And secondly is how do we share our vulnerabilities in a healthy way? And then the role of self compassion, how can we be compassionate with ourselves? And so an observation I would love to bring to you is when you embrace your shadow side, it allows for authenticity and growth. You can do this through journaling. You can do this through meditation. There are great ways of really leaning into that shadow side and integrating it wholly. So that way shame doesn't have a huge hold over you. And as you start to share those things, what you're going to see is the people around you are going to flock to you because authenticity, having people come to you and flock to you is because of this authenticity, because of this way that you're sharing your journey. And what it does is it starts to resonate with the shame within other people. And then they can start to say, hey, you know what? I can probably get over this shame. I could get over this dark side. And then once you integrate the dark side into who you are, it starts to dissipate. You start to see that, oh, these things don't have power over me anymore. And I don't have the compulsion to do this thing that may have caused shame, whether that's drinking or, whatever you struggle with, whether that's, the way that you think about yourself in comparison to other people. So everything has a dark side. And once you can integrate with that dark side, I think that great things happen from it, authenticity and growth. Second is this idea of anxiety as a fear of life's limitations. I think anxiety is our body signaling to us that we have unprocessed pain and we're not dealing with the reality of life's limitations. And this is something that I've gotten from a couple of places, but one of them was this book called The Courage to be Disliked. And I think there is courageousness in two parts. And so what I will talk about is those two parts a little bit later. And so I want you to really think about being courageous is actually in two parts. But if you have anxiety, it's probably because you're not willing to recognize life's limitations. A lot of times people don't want to recognize life's limitations is because it could bring a hint of sadness. It could, like the idea of 4,000 weeks, like that. The human lifespan to 90 plus is like 4,000 weeks. And so if you have only 4,000 weeks to live and you're living your life as if, you have an infinite amount of time, your body is going to experience some anxiety because it's realizing like, hey, this is not the way that we should be living our life. Having a disciplined, healthy routine that allows you to develop strengths, develop outcomes and goals, and just a way for you to get good at something in life, and then to do that and to share that with community is so key. And so, how do you recognize your anxiety as a signal? Are you willing to calm yourself enough to where you realize that this idea of meditation and then checking in with your own body, are you seeing and feeling the signals, or do you suppress the signals that your body sends you? For me specifically, I get like this pit in my stomach. I feel like a little bit nauseous, and I have to remind myself that's not necessarily a health thing. That could be a body thing, because our vagus nerve actually goes from the back of our brain to our stomach, and our stomach is essentially like a second brain. And so when you get that feeling of nausea or that pit in your stomach, or you feel a tightness in your stomach, it's your body trying to signal to you, hey, brain, there are physiological things happening, and you have to make the brain-body connection. And so the steps to confront our limitations, like we need to really embrace this idea that we are limited. And this is a part of courage. And so I would say this is a courage to be limited. And what I mean by that is I am not saying that you should make excuses for your limitations, like just sitting there and saying, this is enough. And so there is a fine-tuned balance. And that's why courage is in two pieces. It's piece A is the courage to embrace your limitations. But there's a second part of that that's going to unlock something great for you. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And I think the other key thing is once we can be courageous enough to be like, hey, this is my limitation, embrace it. And then what that does is that helps us avoid transmission of anxiety. When we are anxious genetically, like we will pass that on to our children, like through conception and through how the state of your DNA as it passes to your children. That's huge. The second thing is the way that you present yourself to the world, and being in a room with more anxious people, I think that that heightens in the transmission of anxiety. One thing I love is Edwin Friedman's book, Failure of Nerve, where he talks about we have to really control our own anxiety. And the idea is a lot of times people with the most anxiety go for the most control. They want to have the most control because of their anxious central nervous system. But once you come to this point of like where you can calm your central nervous system through breath work, through integration, somatic ways, there are so many great ways to do that. But once you do that, you have this big approach. You can approach anxiety with a transformative mindset that once it pops up, you know what to do, whether that's your breath work, whether that's feeling within your body, whether that's journaling. There are so many things, whether that's getting out there and helping that cortisol dissipate through high intensity workout. Anxiety is as a fear of life's limitations can be met with a transformative mindset that will actually help you get better. Philosophy number 3 is pain is an invitation to transform. Just the same way that we can transmit our anxieties, we can transmit our pain. And so I will say this, transforming pain rather than transmitting it is the idea of breaking cycles of pain. And how do you do this? I think you have to ask yourself, what are the steps for me to transform my pain? And one is to look at intrinsic values. And we're going to talk about intrinsic values in just a moment. But if you have a value that you don't want to put more pain back into the world, if you were yelled at as a child and you're like, I don't want to do that to my kids, you have to essentially put yourself in a position where the pain that you felt, you have to process it. You have to go through it. And you have to ask yourself, what are the steps that I'm going to do to transform my pain? And second, you have to share it healthily. And once it goes through the transformed state, you can say, I can now share this with other people that's going to be healthy, that's going to be helpful. It's kind of going back to that idea of once you've embraced the dark side, you've started to wade through your pain and you're not going to transmit it. You're going to transform it. And the way that you transform it is that you have to share it healthily. If you don't navigate your pain, what you tend to do is you tend to communicate those same cycles. You will yell, you will be forceful, you will be maybe mean to other people. You will have words that cut to the core of another person rather than building that person up. And this is so important, is it's really the way that we use our words and we use our touch. These two things are so important. Is your touch going to be a touch of compassion instead of a touch of anger? Is your words going to be words that uplift and ground somebody and help them rather than tear them down and shatter their confidence? And so I think this is important, that we have to use our pain as a catalyst for personal growth and communal growth. And I think there are so many stories that I could share with you of people who have not processed their pain and they do the exact same thing that was done to them within their childhood, maybe their adulthood, even their own story that they tell themselves. They try to transmit that story to other people. And this is why it's so important to take a look at our own story, because if you don't, the pain that you're experiencing, whether that's that's a physical pain or whether that's an emotional pain, those will be transmitted, specifically the emotional pains. But it's so important that we look at pain as an invitation to transform. Philosophy number 4 is truth versus manipulation. I'm going to go ahead and call this bull cookies. But there is this book, and it is a book that I'll link in the description. It was essentially an essay by Harry G. Frankfurt, and he's an American philosopher. It's from 1986, and I'm just keeping it clean for all the young ears, but it's essentially bull cookies. And the idea is distinguishing truth from manipulation and the importance of integrity. And so the way that I want to put it to you is, when a bull sits, a bull makes cookies. And so you don't want people to sell you bull cookies. There is not a lot of good in that. And what tends to happen is this idea that, the person who's telling the truth has a commitment to truth. The person who is telling the lies actually knows what the truth is, and they are negating the truth. But it's the person who is trying to sell you bull cookies. It's the person who's trying to manipulate you that is a danger. And it's because that person who is really invested in bull cookies and manipulation doesn't care what is true. They're going to say whatever they need to say to manipulate you to get an outcome. And I think a lot of times what happens is we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we identify truth? And I would say truth is verifiable. You can actually go and say, we can go back and verify these things. I think it's important to have this idea that truth can be gentle. We don't have to have an inflammatory truth. What I see is a lot of times people are incendiary with their truth because they think, oh, firebombing somebody else is going to get them to my side. And that's not the way that we do that. Or the idea of maintaining integrity. Like, I think, how do you maintain your integrity? You say something and you hold yourself true to that. The person who is manipulating, who is giving bull cookies, is actually going to give you whatever they want to get. They'll say whatever to get something out of you. And this is important. And this is where I point to this great wisdom literature. Proverbs 14:4 says, it's through the strength of many oxen that a great harvest is produced, but you can have a clean barn without any oxen. And so this idea is like, you don't want to deal with bull cookies. Like, everybody doesn't want to deal with it, but you have to if you want to have a strong emotional support network and a strong community, because even people in your own family might be manipulative. And this is sad on the side of the manipulator, because they feel that life is so dangerous that they have to say whatever to wiggle their way through life. That is no way to live. And so just like Proverbs 14:4, it's a little counterintuitive. It's not to cut people off who are speaking all these bull cookies. It's not to cut the manipulator off. It's to introduce them into truth gently and to say, this is true. This is not true. What are you going to decide to do? Because I think it's the persons to the right and to the left, the person who's the liar, the person who is the truth sayer, those people you can understand. It's the manipulator that is dangerous, the one who's in the middle. And once we can push people to truth or to embrace lies, I think it is better than being a manipulator. And I know that might be inflammatory, and you might be saying like, no, people should never lie. But at least the person who is lying understands what is true. And so this is the importance of authenticity and truth building in genuine relationships, that you have to confront bull cookies. And the best way to do it is to introduce truth gently and still hold people to standards. They might not like you for a hot minute, but they're going to love you once they start to understand that integrity is a part of a relational equity. And so once we have integrity in our relationships, what's going to happen is you're going to be trusted more. And I think what's most important is the people that you can't trust, put a little bit of integrity on their shoulders so they can understand that they can hold integrity, they can hold truth, and it's going to make them a better person in the long run. This is another idea that comes from, Harry G. Frankfurt, and also a book called The Courage to be Disliked by Kashimi. I really, really like that a lot. Let's go into Philosophy 5. It's this idea of intrinsic values versus a late-stage capitalist work ethic. I'll say that currently we're in that late-stage capitalist work ethic to where you're seeing tech companies who are willing to fire the 10-15% in order to make margins, but they couldn't have made those margins without those people. And I think a couple of books to recommend to you, like if you don't know anything other than late stage capitalist work, is this book called The Go-Giver Leader. And The Go-Giver Leader essentially is a story about a company who's doing very poor and they've had ups and downs. But what they want to do is they want to keep their integrity, and at the same time, they want to work from their intrinsic values. They would rather have everybody take a pay cut and everybody be in this together than cut the bottom half or the bottom 15% and then give a stock, raise to their executives and to their, benefactors, their stakeholders. And so what I'll say to this is that emphasizing intrinsic value over external pressures brings us to this big idea called the life lie. The life lie is Alfred Adler has a psychology. He's a psychologist. He has some of his own philosophical, psychological, theses that I think are phenomenal. And one of them is this idea of a life lie. And if you are engaging in activities because of social pressures, you are not living authentically. This is called bad faith by the mid-century existentialists. And this goes all the way back to wisdom literature, that you have to embrace, what is being put on your shoulders for this life. And I think a lot of times we negate our intrinsic values because if you're like me and at an early age you learn to shut down, internally, then you have been programmed to perform for other people. And what gets you out of that is going back to your intrinsic values. What do you value? One thing that I valued that I suppressed for quite some time was I value my own time. And so what I realized is I have to be accountable for my own time 100%. I can't give my time away to anybody else, and I can't have somebody telling me what to do with my time. I can, in fact, enter into what I would consider horizontal relationships, and we'll get to that in just a second as we talk about the second part of courageousness. But I think what's important is that we have to ask these big questions: is what are your intrinsic values? Also, what work aligns with those values? And how do you balance personal and communal needs? Once you start to go through these questions, you start to get sharper in this big idea of your intrinsic values driving your work ethic. This is so key, is the thing that's inside of you should be driving that intrinsic value. I'll say this too, is that there's been a lot of pointing at puritanical or, Protestantism as where this late stage capitalist work ethic comes from. No matter where you sit on that scale, intrinsic value is going to be the way that you do that. And sometimes those intrinsic values are brought to life through works of wisdom, through works of philosophy, through works of, whatever the religion or, the school of thought that you subscribe to. And there are a lot of school of thoughts that really call you to intrinsic values, from Stoicism to existentialism to, various religions. I think it's so important that intrinsic values be a part of who you identify with. It's already in you, so you might as well bring it to the top. Next is what I would call community and horizontal relationships. We kind of touched on this in this intrinsic values. And so the importance of authenticity and your fulfillment in your work is key, but you also have to have this balance of community and horizontal relationships. And so the idea is building genuine community through horizontal relationships and supporting others' journeys. The way that Alfred Adler and the Courage to be Disliked book puts this is that we have to make sure that we can have horizontal relationships and stay out of people's way. And what that means is that there might be times where people come alongside you and you work together. And let me back up just a bit. The big idea is with horizontal relationships that we sit as equals. In vertical relationships, what we do is we introduce hierarchy, intrinsic values, and we say, this person actually should be telling you what to do because you can't decide on what to do. I don't think that's the best way forward. And I think that the way that we've been structured from Industrial Revolution actually doesn't give people a community feel. It doesn't strengthen communities. It actually says, you know what? Information's coming from the top. Your commands are coming from the top. Just do whatever you're told. And I think that sabotages intrinsic value, also sabotages horizontal relationships. And before, in agricultural communities, certain people played certain roles. And in that agrarian society, it was easy to say the blacksmith is going to do this, and I'll trade my goods to the blacksmith as he performs his task. We sit horizontally. Everybody rises and falls depending upon, whether the crops are doing well or not doing well. And I think that has been lost in the Industrial Revolution and the information age. And so going back to this big idea of horizontal relationships being something that is very, very important, that we are all equals. And as we sit as equals, that is very, very important. And so you build community through horizontal relationships and staying out of other people's way, meaning that somebody might say, I have to break relationship in order to go do something else. I might leave this micro community, but I am still part of a macro community. And I think that's so important to understand, because if we start to say, you know what, that is awesome, go on your way and I'm going to support you through whatever your journey is important. And some refining questions is, how do you cultivate horizontal relationships? I think this is really, really important, because what's going to happen, specifically, like if you're in an organization, if you lead an organization, your one-on-ones are going to change dramatically. Even though you might be a manager, you might have the responsibility of guiding your team. Once you start to move to horizontal relationships, you're going to say, these are the objectives. As these objectives come through for the organization, it is up to you to decide on how we're going to do this based upon feedback. We will definitely give feedback, but here we are a community of horizontal relationships. Once you start to introduce horizontal relationships to your organization, people are going to start to take a personal responsibility and they are going to do better work. It just hands down. So how do you identify those intrinsic values within your organization? I think it's through your one-on-ones and through deploying this big idea of horizontal relationships. Two, after you cultivating horizontal relationships, supporting others in their path. Meaning, how can I support you even if you're going to leave a micro community of how we work? You don't leave the larger community of maybe where we live or the larger community of, said experience, the shared human experience that we're experiencing. There's something that still connects us. And I think that's super, super, super important, is supporting others in their path. How can you best do that? And finally, how are you going to foster community growth? And what I think is development. I think having development cultures is so, so, so important. Whether that's a community development, like, whether that's like libraries, or the way that we invest in, food for people. Like, are we going to have a community garden? You can do that like that. The same way goes for organizations. How are you going to develop your people, and how are you going to resource them in a way that is going to foster community growth? I've seen this done very, very well when the community has the tools to do that themselves, when it's not coming from a top-down, organization, but it's coming from this horizontal relationships of, hey, what is a lunch and learn, to where we can start to read a book together, or how can we get sharper in a lot of leveraging other people's strengths and then teaching those strengths to each other. That is how community growth happens. And so finally, the observation I want to leave you with is the value of community and the individual contribution is tied together. So I'm going to say that again. The value of community and individual contributions are tied together. If you want to build great community, you need to 100% support the individuals who will go into, they will develop that. Finally, this last one I love. This is from Simon Sinek, and I just love the way that he communicates. It's sharpening the blade, and this idea of continuous improvement. I'll tell you the story that I heard from Simon Sinek. It is a story of two lumberjacks, and one of them, is very keen on taking a 1 hour break after the 2 o'clock to the 3 o'clock period. The second woodcutter continues to work throughout the entirety of the day, only choosing to take a 1 hour lunch. Now, they start at the same time, they end at the same time, but the lumberjack actually takes 2 hours out of his day, one for lunch and then another for who knows what. And so the woodcutter gets frustrated and says, hey, you're outperforming me in the woodcutting, and you still take an hour break. What is it that you're doing that I'm not doing? And the lumberjack says to the woodcutter, I go home for an hour and I sharpen my blade. And sharpening the blade is this idea of continuous learning and self-improvement is essential for your productivity and your personal fulfillment. And the reason that sharpening the blade is so, so, so important is because nobody's going to sharpen the blade for you. This is an individualistic task. This is something that you need to do. While this can be put into this idea of community contribution, it is so important that you are sharpening your own blade, that you're continuously learning, and you are moving into this idea of fulfillment. And so the refining question for you is, how can you incorporate regular improvement practices? What are some learnings? What are some books? What are some practices that you can do? Secondly is, what are beneficial skills that you want to develop? Whether that's like coding or drawing, or that's networking. Networking is actually a skill. There are really great ways for you to become better within some of your own deficits, or partner with people for those deficits. But still having the ability to practice those skills, sharpening the blade, is going to be huge. And finally, how are you going to balance learning with your workload? I think slow productivity is a framework that is so, so beautiful. Cal Newport introduces this idea, but I do think that there is this idea that could be further developed in how can we do this in the day-to-day. where we can balance workload and we can also balance learning. And I will say this, some of the findings from neuroscience show that we can only do deep work tasks for up to 4 hours. So if we do have a 8-hour workday, how are we breaking this up? How are we sharpening the blade? Because I believe that it's a 4 and 4. We should be deep working for 4 hours, and we should also be sharpening the blade for multiple hours a day in different ways, whether that's investing in our own health, investing in relationships, networking, or investing in our learning. Those are so important. And finally, the observation for you is this: the importance of continuous growth and development is key in your fulfillment and productivity. And so what I will say is life shouldn't be all about productivity. There should be a balance. You should have a work balance. You should have a life balance, and you should have relational balances. And so what I mean about all those things is that there are a lot of factors that go into you as a person. And if you just pigeonhole yourself to 12 hours a day of work, what you've done is you actually short-circuited your neurology, because you probably did 4 great hours, but those other 8 hours that you try to put in, they were probably unproductive. They were probably not well thought through. They were probably filled with multiple mistakes. And so these 7 philosophies are here to help you live a better story. If there's any philosophies that I have missed, I would love for you to drop them down below. What are some things that you're bringing into your 2025 that are going to help you move forward? If any of these resonated with you, you can drop them in the comments below. If you're listening, you can always hit me up on any of the social medias at Nick_Ovaya. I would love to hear from you. Finally, if this sounds like something of you want to continue on past a podcast, you could go to storybetter.co. At storybetter.co, there's a 90-day challenge that is going to help you get your diet, your mind, your learning, and your physical body all in alignment, because those are the things that influence your internal narrative. Storybetter.co, 90-day challenge for you. It's painful. It is difficult, but it is well worth it, because at the end of those 90 days, you are going to be transformed. It's something that I've done multiple times in my life. And as Storybetter is a framework for us living a better internal narrative, go check it out, storybetter.co. You have to experience it for yourself. No words will actually help until you do it yourself. So thanks again for tuning into this podcast. And until we chat again, I hope you tell the world a great story. Peace.